Okay, we're going to continue on with 1 Samuel at just the tail end of 16, even though I'm going to call this 17, just so you know, I should have finished this little part. So let's continue on. Okay, so David plays the harp for Saul. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. His servant told him, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. And Saul wants to find someone who can play the harp, as his servant suggests to him, which will relax him a little bit so the spirit stops tormenting him. So Saul asked for someone who play the harp. So his servant says, I know Jesse's son David plays one, and he's really good. So Saul sent for David. David found new favor with Saul and asked his father if he could enter his service and I guess come and work for him. I guess they did that because they didn't have radios back then. So David came and worked for him, and Saul loved him greatly, became very attached to him. Whenever the evil spirit of God was upon Saul, David took out the harp and played it, so Saul was refreshed, and the evil spirit departed from him. Now I want to show you this box about the healing power of music that's in our trusty Breakthrough Bible for Young Catholics, which I use as kind of my aid to go along. So David has many talents. One, that he could write songs and play the harp. In fact, whenever Saul was tormented, an evil spirit causing Saul to feel bad, David would play his harp. Saul's advisors knew that all of us know today music can have a powerful effect on our moods. If we have a bad day, we turn to our favorite music to help us feel better, or we're feeling great and often turn music to celebrate as well. Everyone has their favorite songs, favorite performers, favorite types of music. Music is a great gift, and there's an amazing variety of it. Music should raise us to a higher level. Every major religion includes music in its worship because music has power to lift us up. It is also true that there are songs and artists whose music often send negative messages. See, that's what I like about this book. It helps relate it to the young people today, and it kind of guides them a little, and often sends negative messages about life and relationship. Music that accepts violence, drug use, and immoral sex does not lift us up, but can tear us down. Look at the lyrics or words of music you listen to most often. What messages are coming through? What choices can you make? And limit your exposure to negative messages in music. Now, we all know that too. Exposing our own selves as adults to music that is negative is just, it's not good for our soul. And everyone wants to be part of the culture today, but you really have to be careful when you want to be part of this culture. We really need to stay focused on God. I'm not saying you can't enjoy yourself, but you really need to be careful what you're exposing your soul to. So, key event, David kills Goliath. Okay, so the Philistines gathered to fight. Goliath, who was over 9 feet tall and wore bronze armor, which Breaking Through talks more about that than Jeff Caven's Bible, kind of takes some of that out. But he wore bronze armor, but weighed 125 pounds, challenged the Israelites. All of Saul's men were terrified. Meanwhile, David's older brothers had come to work for Saul in that time and help him in battle. And Jesse's, who's David's father, had David take back some food to his brothers when he had come home to care for the sheep, which he sometimes did. And I like hearing these little details. It makes them full people. We see David starting out as just a kid to becoming king, and I just love that progression. So David took the food. Meanwhile, Goliath has been challenging the Israelites every morning when David heard him. Also, I want to say this. We know the David and Goliath story, but when we hear it so close and personal, starting from when David is just a tiny kid, a young kid to moving up to king, it really brings it into focus of why he did this. So David asked the man who were near that, will the man who kills this Philistine, because they're all talking about it. It's the talk of the town, and the talk of the warrior guys too, because that's what they're specifically dealing with. And so David says, ask the men, well, will this man who kills the Philistine and frees Israel from this disgrace? After all, who is he? A Philistine. Who is he in Philistine to defy the army of the living God? He's like, how dare him? Like, he's very insulted that he's going up against God, and he's thinking he's more powerful. So David's older brother heard him and became angry, and another one of Saul's men went back and told Saul how this exchange kind of took place. And Saul sent for David, and David said, well, why should I be afraid of this Philistine? I'll go and fight him. And Saul kind of, he's like, well, you're just a kid. You're not going to go and fight him. You're just a boy. David told him when he tended sheep that he had to fight off lions and bears, and told him how he did it, and tells it very graphically. And I like that part in here. You might want to read into that. And said that the Lord saved him every time, and he would save him from the Philistine Goliath. So Saul's like, okay. Well, he dressed him up in his best armor, and David chose 5 small stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's bag. And his sling was in his hand. David gets in front of Goliath and said, you come with me. A sword and a spear, I come at you in the name of the Lord, and I will cut off your head. Goliath drew near David. He probably was kind of laughing at him. He's this big guy, and here's this little boy. David ran quickly, put his hand in his bag, slung his stone, and struck Goliath in the forehead. He fell down on his face. David stood over him, drew his sword, and cut off his head. All the Philistines fled. Saul was very impressed. This is the fast version, so you might want to read that. It's just so interesting. So then we get down here into 18. Jonathan's covenant with David. Jonathan is Saul's son. He loves David and made a covenant with him, giving him all of his armor because they were all so impressed with him. Saul would not allow David to return to his father's house and sent him to war. And everywhere David went, he was successful. He killed many. As David returned home from killing a Philistine, dancing women come to meet them and start singing a song to meet him and Saul. Saul has slain thousands and David has slain tens of thousands. Well, that really made Saul mad. And that they implied that David was more successful than him. From that day forward, Saul carefully eyed him. So he became jealous of him from that time forward. Saul tries to kill David. The next day, an evil spirit rushed over Saul, and he raved while David was playing the harp. And Saul cast a spear at David, and David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because he knew the Lord was with him. So he removed him from his presence and made him commander of 1,000. David had great success. So it sounds like his conscience, he's like, I better not do this. But then you'll see how it overtakes. So David had such great success that Saul realized and stood in awe of him. Then he realized what people were talking about. All of Israel and Judah loved David. He apparently had a very magnetic personality, which a lot of very good leaders have. David marries Michal. Saul offers David his beautiful daughter for marriage. David, coming from a poor family, regarded Saul as a king and didn't feel adequate. So Saul then gives her to someone else. Then later, Saul has another daughter that liked David. So he gave Michal to David. Saul knew that the Lord was with David and that all of Israel loved him. And he was jealous of that. So, evidently, he still gave him his daughter, though. So 19. Jonathan intercedes for David. Saul spoke to his son, Jonathan, and his servants that he should kill David. Well, Jonathan loves David and told him about his father's plans and told him to hide. Jonathan told his father, Saul, let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you. He has been very good. He has been good service to you. He killed the Philistine and gave the Lord a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you kill David without cause? I love their arguments. They're very formal and the language, I just love it. Michal helps sometimes. Michal helps David escape from Saul. Then there's a war again, and David goes out to fight with the Philistines and slaughtered many, so others fled. Then an evil spirit came upon Saul as he sat in his house with a spear in his hand. David was playing the harp and jumped up as Saul went to pin him up against the wall with a spear, but he got away. David escaped. That night, Saul sent messengers to David's house to wash him so he could kill him in the morning. But David's wife, Michal, warned him, and David went through the window and he escaped. Michal put an image of a pillow with a pillow and goat's hair and covered and told the messengers to tell Saul he's sick. And then Saul finds out. Remember, this is Saul's daughter. She apparently knows his anger management issues. Why? And so Saul says, he finds out his daughter did this. He says, "Why have you deceived me? Let my enemy go." He said he would kill me if I didn't help him escape, which we know isn't true. David joined Samuel in Ramah. David went to Samuel and told him everything that Saul had done to him. Saul sent his men out to arrest David. Remember, he's still king. This kind of overlaps. That's the weird part, is the Lord took it from him, but he's still acting as king. And I don't understand all that part. I'm going to look into it later. And he sent him to arrest David, and they saw him there with a group of prophets dancing and shouting with Samuel as their leader. The Spirit of God took control of the souls of the men, and they also began to dance and shout. And when Saul heard this, he sent more messengers, and 2 and 3 times the same thing happens 3 times. So then he went there, and the Spirit of God took control of him too. And he stripped and danced and shouted and laid in bed naked day and night. And that is how the saying, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" came about. That was kind of weird, but okay. So 20. The relationship of David and Jonathan. Jonathan doesn't believe that his father wants to kill David. He's like, I can't believe he still wants to do this. So they arrange a time to figure it out once and for all. And they do. Once they do, Saul proves and goes after Jonathan, his own son, once they use this way to figure out if he's still feeling that way. So Jonathan goes to tell David, and it's a very emotional exchange between them. It's very touching. So you might want to read Samuel 20, because it's really good. There's a lot here, but we don't have time to get into all that. But it's really, really good. So you might want to look at that. So 21, David and the holy bread. David went to see Ahimelech, the priest, trembling with fear. David told Ahimelech that King Saul charged him with a matter, but was not allowed to tell anyone why. He was told he is not allowed to tell anyone why. David asked for bread, but the priest had none except for holy bread, just kind of like we have the Eucharist. See, another prefiguring. Then David asked for a sword, but the priest said all he had was Goliath's sword, which was very interesting, wasn't that? The strongest man. One of them, well, until the little boy came along. David flees to Gath. He just flees there. There's a little bit about that, not that interesting. David and his followers at Adullam. Then his family and 400,000, this is David, then David and his family and 400,000 followers, including David's parents, go with him to the king of Moab. And he asks the king to care for his parents and leaves for the forest of Hereth, because he wanted his parents to go to safety while he outran him until he could calm down. I guess the daughter told him, look, you got to outrun him until the daughter, maybe she kind of advised him. I don't know. It doesn't say here, but it kind of implies she knows about her father's anger. Saul slaughters the priests at Nob. Very interesting here. Saul found out David had seen Ahimelech, and he gave him Goliath's sword. So Saul accused the priests of conspiring against him with his own son. He killed Ahimelech's family and 85 priests that day, and then he goes back to kill everyone in the town, including women and children. One of Ahimelech's son, Abiathar, escaped and went to David to tell him of all the priests and the whole town being killed. And David tells him, well, then you need to stay with me. So now I want to get to 359. I'm sorry, Kitty. I got to show something here. 359. What is that? 355. Okay. Innocent blood. Okay. So Saul has clearly let his anger and jealousy overtake him, because the priest Ahimelech has helped David feed his men. Saul decides to take revenge and orders 85 priests killed, then has everyone else in the city of Nob killed, as well as children and even babies. This slaughter of innocent blood is a terrible sin. Throughout history, we have examples of innocent people being killed. Every continent and every century has its own horror stories about innocent people being put to death. We have them today. To some people in power, life is cheap. They have no regard for the sanctity of human life. They are like bullies on the playground who pick on people or beat them up simply to show that they are tougher. But they do it on a larger scale and much deadlier scale. Bullies, large and small, often come to violent ends themselves, and we find this. If you're being bullied, let a trusted adult know. If you are involved in being a bully, take a good hard look at who you are bullying and why, and decide to not to add to the world's violence. So I love this book. It's just so good for kids. Besides the Great Adventure Bible, it's like I literally have them side by side, because when I don't understand this, I jump to that. Okay, so Samuel 23. David saves the city of Keilah. Men come, and David told David, the Philistines are robbing and fighting against Keilah. David asked the Lord, should I go and attack? The Lord told him yes, but his men were afraid. You see the bravery of David? Wait, first I wanted to talk about innocent blood. If you notice, one time in here, God tells him to kill these people, and I'm like, why would God kill innocent blood? Kill innocent people? Well, the fact is that God knows everyone's purpose in this world and when their life is to end. And that apparently was how long those people were supposed to live according to the Lord. And so that to me kind of helps me accept when younger people die. It's like, well, they fulfilled their thing on earth. Nobody says we are guaranteed 75 years here or 80 years or whatever. So I just wanted to mention that. And then here we are. David asked the Lord, this shows his bravery. This shows that this is leaders need courage, bravery, and they also need the Lord. And David has both of those. I'm so impressed now more with David than I ever was. I thought, oh, he plays the harp and he's a king, and I think of the kings of today, but he's not like that. So David asked the Lord if he should go and attack. The Lord told him yes, but his men were afraid. David asked the Lord again, and he said, go, I will deliver the Philistines to your hand. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. Saul found out, but he couldn't catch up with him. Meanwhile, Saul's guys are searching for him, and as they're closing in, David sees him, and David is able to elude him because Saul is called away because the Philistines had been raiding their properties. So now this place is called Rock of Escape, and I'm looking for it here. I thought it was right here. Okay. It's somewhere in there. Rock of Escape. That's what the place is now called. Okay. Okay, that's all here. Yeah, there it is. Rock of Escape. So that's what all this says. What we just talked about. Okay, 24. David spares Saul's life. Once Saul returned from the Philistine fight, he took 3,000 men with him to find David. But he left his men go off to relieve himself. Yes, it talks about relieving themselves in the Bible, which shocked me. David and his men were right there, and David cut a piece of Saul's skirt. Yes, men wore skirts then. And the men were right there, and David cut a piece from Saul's skirt. Afterwards, David felt bad. And since one time the Lord chose Saul to be king, and so he thought, the Lord chose him. So he stopped his men from killing Saul. David rose and followed after Saul and called him. Saul turned around, and David held the piece of the skirt and said, I had the chance to kill you, and you are trying to kill me because you think I'm going to rebel against you. If I want it, and this shows how intelligent David is too. I'm just so much more impressed with him. And you think I'm going to rebel against you. If I wanted to kill you, I would have just killed you now. And he had another chance too. And he brought up a proverb of the ancients. Out of the wicked comes forth wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. And the speech is much better than you have to go. So he tells this, and I'm telling you that his speech is much better than I can put here. So you have to go and read it. And I can see why God chose this man. He's not just the guy who plays a harp and writes beautiful songs. He's a good fighter. He's good looking. He's intelligent. Go read 1 Samuel 24. Okay? Out of the wickedness comes forth wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. Okay. So Saul is shocked. Oh, okay. So Saul is shocked and said, is that you, my son David? And Saul says, you're a better man than I, more righteous man than I. So may the Lord reward you with good. And now, behold, I know you shall surely be king. Please swear to me you will not cut off my descendants after me, and you will not destroy my name. David swears this to Saul. So Saul went home, but David and his men still go back to the stronghold. So he's still hiding from him. So I guess he's not totally sure. So you need to read it. It's really good. Better than what I'm putting in here. Breakthrough box. I want to show you 363. This book is so good for kids and teaching them. So try to imagine David's situation. He could very easily have killed Saul. He knew Saul would kill him if given the chance, so why did he spare his life? It's simple respect. David knew that even though Saul had fallen out of favor with God, Saul was still God's chosen king, and he had a great respect for both God and for his king. This says a lot about David's character. Respect is a very important virtue, a sign of maturity. We need to respect those in authority. We may not always agree with them, but we still respect their position. You see how it's teaching about the Bible here, and it's teaching about proper behavior for children using this. Here's a checklist of people you could pray for: your parents, your principal, all, and it goes through that, which is very, I mean, we all need to follow that, you know? There's a lot of disrespect today, and we all need to follow that, really. So, okay, so back here to 25. The death of Samuel. Samuel died, and all of Israel mourned him. And that's all they say about that, which I thought was interesting. David and Abigail. David, being in the wilderness with all his men come across this man and his wife Abigail. David sent messengers to let them know he did not allow his men to hurt this man's shepherds that were taking care of his thousands of sheep during this war. And because of that, would they be gracious enough to give him some food? Meanwhile, the man's like, no, I don't know you from anywhere. You're probably a runaway slave. I'm not going to give you anything. And then he said, beat it, you know, basically. So evidently his shepherds told the wife, and the wife felt bad. Abigail, that's her name. She got together quickly 200 loaves, of course didn't tell her husband, and brought it to them. When she realized that David was who was going to be the next king, she fell down off her donkey and horse or whatever and apologized for her husband. When David realized that she brought him the food without knowing who he was, he really admired her character. And she went back home to her husband. And then he died, I think, 10 days later. And when David heard that, he sent a message of a proposal to marry her. He admired her so much. She agreed and became his wife. And so now we go to Ahinoam of Jezreel. So David now has like 4 wives. 365. David's wives. The final verse of Samuel, chapter 25, lists a few of David's wives. The religious and civil laws in our country forbid polygamy, which means having more than one spouse. However, during the time of David, it was very common for men to have more than one wife. It's especially common for a ruler or a military leader to have several. One of the reasons was to protect women. In biblical times, women had no rights and were generally considered property as adult women who wasn't married, didn't belong to anyone, and had no protector. We have a very different attitude today toward women and marriage. So that I thought was interesting enough to share. 26. Oh, I got to go quick. David again spared Saul's life. Saul had the chance. Again, he comes upon Saul, who was pursuing him, and he's asleep, but he stops his men from killing him again. And David lets Saul no, and he says, look, I've done wrong. Return. He says, but he stops his men from killing him again. And David lets all know. And then Saul says, I've done wrong. Return, my son David. I will no longer pursue you any harm because my life is precious in your eyes. There's so much more to this story that I can't really get into. It's just so good. Behold, I have played the fool, and I have erred exceedingly. So they walk away in peace from each other. No. Okay. David goes to King Achish in Gath. That's all, really. There's nothing more to that. It's not very interesting. Okay, 28. Saul consults a medium at Endor. Have you noticed the Lord does not answer Saul very often? So he's going to psychics and seers. And that's something we need to understand because I know when I was younger, I did that and I did those things. Today, I realize what a sin they are. I didn't know that. But that's because I wasn't close to God. And that's why it's very important to make sure that your kids avoid that sin by trying to keep them close to God through using things like breaking through. And we can't just assume kids are going to absorb this stuff. They are not. Page 368. Oh, I wanted to show you 368. Hold on here. Calling up the dead. Yeah. And so he goes and he calls up, he wants to call up Samuel to talk to him. And this basically talks about that, and children need to learn that. So I'm glad that they have it in here. I don't have time to read it all, but it's very good. So get that book. You can get it used $5 on any used, Amazon sometimes has them used, and anywhere, just look in Google, you'll find it used for like $5 and $5 shipping, like $10. Okay. So Samuel, 29. Okay. So, basically that's what it's about. Even though Saul knew this was a sin, he threw all of the psychics out of the land, and the seers and the prophets. But then he goes and looks for one, and she said, I can't see you because Saul, he was disguised, and he swore to her, you will not, no punishment will come upon you, just read me. So basically that's what that's about. And this next part, 29, confuses me. This completely confuses me. I'm going to go back after my 30 days and look into this because I don't understand why he would be trying to join the Philistines. It doesn't make sense at all. So I'll look into that later. And that's what Jeff Cavins said on your first real good run through the Bible. As I said, I know very little about military operations and strategy, so I don't know what this is about, and I'm going to have to find out later. Okay, so Samuel 30. David avenges the destruction of Ziklag. David returns home, finds out his whole town is burned, and 2 of his wives are missing. And many of his men lost their family, and they are very angry at David. But the Lord gave him courage. Once again, he called on his courage. He got one of them who was sick and got left behind, and he promised that he would leave. Okay, so this is one of the people who raided his land and burnt everything and all that. He got one of them that was injured, that was left behind, and he got him to tell him where they went. And he promised him he would be safe if he just told him that. So he told him where he could find them, and David went and rescued everyone, including his wives. Okay, so basically that's all that's about. And then here on 31 is the end of the first book of Samuel. So the death of Saul and his sons. And this is a very dramatic story. The Philistines fought the battle against the Israelites, and many Israelites were killed, including Saul's sons. This is another battle that they're in. This is a lot of fighting and all that. Military leaders. Saul was badly injured and told... Okay, so what happens is Saul's 2 sons get killed the same day, right at the same time in this battle. Then Saul's badly injured and tells one of his men, look, kill me, otherwise they're going to come and torture me to death. And so his servant or whoever he's with, his fellow fighter, will not do it. And so he falls on the sword himself. And then his man did himself as well. So Saul and his sons all died on the same day. This is the last thing I want to show you, breaking through to 71. Okay. A tragic end. Saul's story is a very sad one. He and his sons meet a brutal and bloody end. What happened to this once promising king of Israel? There are lots of answers, but the simplest is ego. Saul let his ego take over, and he forgot about God. He disobeyed, and he did not follow God's will. He spent his last days chasing after David, slaughtering priests, calling up Samuel's spirit. Yeah, that's what we were talking about, the psychic stuff. And finally committing suicide. His sons, including David's best friend Jonathan, are also dead. because that was Saul's sons. Saul failed as a king. He failed and met a tragic end because he turned away from God, and he was too stubborn and too proud to change his ways and get off the path of destruction he was on. Let us remember that it is never too late to turn away from sin and return to God. And I just want to say here, you see how God regretted that. And really, that just talks that God gives us free will. We have free will to make our choices. He can put us up to a certain level and we can destroy it. So we have to remember that and stay humble and stay connected to God. And you have to teach your children how to connect to God. It's not easy in this world, but we must do it. So we'll see you on Samuel 2.